Imagine a country that was erased from the map for more than 100 years, invaded, divided, and crushed between powerful empires, yet somehow never lost its soul, a land where defeat didn't mean surrender, and survival itself became an act of rebellion. This is the story of Poland, a nation that refused to disappear. From ancient tribes and medieval kings to world wars, occupation, and the fight for freedom, Poland's history is one of resilience, sacrifice, and rebirth. And once you understand what this country endured, you'll never look at Europe, or resistance, the same way again. In the beginning, the land we now call Poland was not a country in the modern sense, but a shared homeland of Slavic tribes spread across forests, rivers, and open plains. These people did not think in terms of borders or nations, but in family ties, local leaders, and survival through cooperation. Life revolved around agriculture, seasonal cycles, and defense against rival tribes. What bound them together was language, tradition, and a growing sense that they belonged to the same cultural world. Over time, these loose tribal structures began to harden into something stronger, driven by the need for stability and protection in a region constantly exposed to outside pressure. Geography played a silent but powerful role, because Poland's flat terrain made it a crossroads of Europe, open to trade, ideas, and unfortunately, invasion. From the very start, survival depended on unity. The turning point came with the rise of a leader named Mieszko I, a ruler who understood that strength alone was not enough to secure his people's future. In the 10th century, Europe was divided not just by swords, but by belief. Christian kingdoms formed a network of alliances, laws, and recognition, while pagan lands were seen as fair targets for conquest. Mieszko saw this clearly, and in 966 he made a decision that would echo through Polish history for more than 1,000 years. By accepting Christianity, he brought his people into the European political and cultural system. This was not a simple religious act, but a strategic transformation. Christianity gave Poland international legitimacy, protected it from forced conversion by foreign powers, and allowed it to develop institutions that would outlast any single ruler. This moment marked the birth of Poland as a state, but more importantly, it marked the birth of a shared identity. The conversion unified tribes under one faith, one ruler, and one political vision. Churches became centers of learning, writing began to record laws and history, and Poland slowly stepped onto the European stage. The idea of Poland was no longer fragile or temporary. It became something that could be passed down, defended, and remembered. This early foundation explains why identity would later matter more to Poland than territory itself. As the state grew, so did its challenges. Early Polish rulers had to balance internal unity with constant external threats. Empires rose and fell around them, and Poland often stood between rival powers. There were moments of expansion and moments of fragmentation, when internal divisions weakened the kingdom and tested its survival. Yet even during these difficult periods, the idea of Poland never vanished. Each reunification reinforced the belief that Poland was meant to exist, regardless of how many times it fell apart politically. This cycle of collapse and recovery trained the nation in resilience long before its greatest trials began. What truly set Poland apart in its early development was the relationship between rulers and society. While authority was strong, it was not absolute in the same way seen elsewhere in Europe. Over time, nobles gained influence, local governance grew, and the seeds of political participation were planted. This did not make Poland perfect or stable, but it created a culture in which freedom and identity were deeply connected. Being Polish came to mean more than obeying a king. It meant belonging to a shared historical journey. Religion also became inseparable from national identity, not as a tool of oppression, but as a source of continuity. The Church preserved language, customs, and memory during times of instability. Faith became a cultural anchor that survived invasions and internal crises alike. This connection would later help Poland endure periods when political power was stripped away entirely. By the time Poland entered the medieval world as a recognized kingdom, it had already developed a unique understanding of itself. It was not just a territory to be ruled, but a community bound by history, belief, and shared struggle. This understanding explains why later attempts to destroy Poland as a state would ultimately fail. You can remove borders, overthrow governments, and occupy cities, but it is far harder to erase an identity that has been carefully built over centuries. The early centuries of Poland's existence taught its people a critical lesson. Survival depends on unity, adaptability, and memory. From tribal beginnings to Christian kingdom, Poland learned to evolve without losing itself. Every challenge reinforced the idea that Poland was not temporary or accidental. It was deliberate, defended, and deeply rooted in the lives of its people. This foundation would be tested repeatedly in the centuries to come through wars, partitions, and occupations. But the reason Poland could endure those later disasters lies here at the very beginning. The birth of Poland was not just the creation of a state, but the creation of a mindset, a belief that even when power is lost, identity remains. A belief that being Polish is something carried within people, not written on maps. From ancient Slavic tribes to a unified Christian state, Poland's earliest chapter set the tone for everything that followed. It taught the nation how to survive in one of the most dangerous regions in Europe. It taught the value of adaptation without surrender, and most importantly, it created an identity strong enough to outlive kingdoms, empires, and centuries of struggle. As Poland moved beyond its early struggles for survival, it entered a period that would define its place in European history and shape how the nation understood power, freedom, and responsibility. This era did not begin with conquest alone, but with cooperation, vision, and an understanding that strength could come from unity rather than domination. The union between Poland and Lithuania was one of the most remarkable political achievements of the medieval world. What began as a strategic alliance slowly evolved into the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, a vast state stretching from the Baltic to the edges of Eastern Europe. At its height, it was one of the largest countries on the continent, not built through brutal colonization, but through shared interests and negotiated authority. What made this state truly unique was not just its size, but the way it was governed. While much of Europe moved toward absolute monarchy, Poland took a different path. Power was shared between the king and the nobility, and rulers were elected rather than born into unquestioned authority. This system was imperfect and often chaotic, but it reflected a deep belief that freedom mattered, the idea that leaders should be chosen, that laws should protect the rights of citizens, and that no ruler should be above the state itself, was revolutionary for its time. In an age of crowns and dynasties, Poland experimented with early democratic ideals that would not become common elsewhere for centuries. This political culture shaped Polish society in powerful ways. Nobles were not simply landowners or warriors, but participants in governance. Debate, negotiation, and compromise became central to political life. While this system favored the elite and excluded much of the population, it still created an environment where power was questioned rather than blindly accepted. Over time, this nurtured a strong sense of personal and collective freedom. To be Polish during this golden age was to believe that liberty was worth defending, even when it complicated rule or slowed decision-making. Cultural life flourished alongside political development. Cities grew wealthy through trade, connecting Poland to markets across Europe and beyond. Scholars traveled freely, ideas crossed borders, and education expanded. Poland became a refuge for those fleeing religious persecution elsewhere. Jews, Protestants, Orthodox Christians, and Catholics lived side by side in relative tolerance compared to the rest of Europe. This diversity enriched Polish culture, creating a society shaped by multiple traditions and perspectives. Tolerance was not perfect, but it was far ahead of its time, and it reinforced the idea that unity did not require uniformity. Militarily, Poland was anything but weak. The Commonwealth developed one of the most formidable fighting forces in Europe. The Winged Hussars became legendary for their speed, discipline, and devastating charges. They defended Europe's eastern frontier against invasion and played decisive roles in battles that shaped the continent's future. These victories were not just military achievements, but symbols of national pride. They reinforced the belief that Poland was not only free, but capable of defending that freedom against overwhelming odds. Yet, even during this period of strength and success, cracks slowly began to appear. The same freedoms that defined the Commonwealth also made it vulnerable. Political paralysis often emerged as individual nobles blocked reforms to protect their own interests. Foreign powers learned how to exploit this system, influencing elections and weakening central authority. What had once been a source of pride gradually became a source of instability. But at the time, few could imagine that a state so vast and influential could ever truly collapse. For the people living through this golden age, Poland felt permanent. Its borders were wide, its culture vibrant, and its identity secure. Art, literature, and philosophy reflected confidence rather than fear. There was a sense that Poland had found a balance between power and freedom that others had failed to achieve. This confidence would later make the fall even more painful, but it also left behind something invaluable. It created a memory of what Poland could be, a vision of greatness rooted not just in conquest, but in values. The importance of this era lies not only in what Poland achieved, but in what it believed about itself. The Commonwealth taught Poles that their nation was capable of leadership, innovation, and moral authority. It showed that strength did not require tyranny and that diversity could be a source of stability rather than weakness. These beliefs became part of the national consciousness, surviving long after the Commonwealth itself disappeared. When later generations faced occupation, partition, and erasure, they looked back to this golden age as proof that Poland had once stood among Europe's greatest powers. This memory fueled resistance and preserved hope. It reminded people that their identity was not defined by defeat, but by centuries of achievement and courage. Even in exile or under foreign rule, the idea of the Commonwealth lived on as a symbol of lost sovereignty and future possibility. The rise of Poland during this period was not accidental. It was the result of deliberate choices, bold experiments, and a willingness to trust in freedom even when it carried risks. Those choices shaped a national character that valued dignity over submission and cooperation over blind obedience. Although the Commonwealth would eventually fall, the values it embodied could not be destroyed. This golden age did more than elevate Poland politically and militarily. It defined what it meant to be Polish. It linked national identity with freedom, tolerance, and resilience. It created a standard against which future generations would measure both loss and recovery. And in doing so, it ensured that even when Poland lost its state, it would never lose its sense of purpose or its belief in its own worth. The fall of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth did not come in a single dramatic moment, but through a slow and painful process that shocked Europe and shattered Polish society. Powerful neighbours who had once feared Poland now saw opportunity in its weakness. Russia, Prussia, and Austria moved carefully at first, interfering in politics, manipulating elections, and weakening institutions from within. Poland's internal divisions made resistance difficult, and reform came too late. When the first partition took place in 1772, much of the population could hardly believe it. Large sections of Polish land were simply taken, not through conquest alone, but through diplomatic agreements made without Polish consent. It was a warning, but not yet the end. As pressure mounted, Polish reformers attempted one last desperate effort to save their country. They introduced one of Europe's first modern constitutions, hoping to strengthen the state and limit foreign influence. For a brief moment, it seemed possible that Poland might recover, but its neighbors would not allow it. The second partition followed, and then the third. In 1795, Poland was wiped off the map entirely. There was no Polish king, no Polish parliament, no Polish state. For the first time in centuries, Poland officially ceased to exist. What followed was one of the most extraordinary chapters in European history. Most nations, when destroyed, fade into memory. Poland did the opposite. Without borders, without an army, and without political power, the Polish people refused to accept that their nation was gone. They understood that survival now depended not on territory, but on identity. Language became an act of resistance. Teaching Polish to children was no longer just education, but defiance. Songs, poems, and stories carried national memory when official institutions were forbidden or dismantled. Each occupying power ruled differently, but all sought to erase Polish identity in their own way. In some regions, the Polish language was banned from schools. In others, Polish culture was tolerated only under strict control. Churches were watched, books were censored, and loyalty was demanded. Yet repression often produced the opposite effect. The harder Poland was pushed into silence, the more determined its people became to remember who they were. Families passed down history in whispers. Writers turned memory into literature. Artists turned loss into symbols of hope. Uprisings erupted again and again, even when success seemed impossible. Polish rebels fought knowing that defeat was likely, but they believed that resistance itself mattered. Each failed uprising became part of a larger story, one that taught future generations that freedom was worth suffering for. Exile became common as many Polish leaders and intellectuals fled abroad. But even in foreign lands they carried Poland with them. Paris, London, and other cities became centers of Polish political thought, where dreams of independence were kept alive through diplomacy, writing, and organizing. This period transformed Polish culture in profound ways. Romanticism flourished, turning history into myth and suffering into purpose. Poets became national heroes. Literature replaced lost institutions. Music expressed longing for a homeland that existed only in memory. Poland became an idea as much as a place, something carried in the heart rather than defined by borders. This emotional connection to the nation grew stronger precisely because the state was gone. Religion also played a critical role during this time. The church became one of the few spaces where Polish language and tradition could survive openly. Faith offered continuity in a world that seemed designed to erase Polish existence. It linked past generations to future ones, reinforcing the belief that Poland's disappearance was temporary, not permanent. Despite constant pressure, Polish identity adapted rather than broke. In some regions, Poles learned to survive quietly, preserving culture beneath the surface. In others, they resisted openly, risking imprisonment or death. There was no single way to be Polish during this time, but all shared a refusal to forget. This flexibility made Polish identity stronger, not weaker. It learned how to exist without power, how to survive without recognition, and how to wait. Generations were born and died without ever seeing an independent Poland, yet they believed in it as firmly as if it existed. Children learned about a country they had never known. Maps were memorized not as reality, but as promise. The idea of Poland became timeless, stretching beyond any one lifetime. This belief sustained the nation through decades of disappointment and loss. The world changed around Poland, empires rose and fell, and new ideologies reshaped Europe. Through it all, the Polish question never disappeared. Each major conflict raised the possibility that Poland might return. Each disappointment reinforced the lesson that independence would not be given freely. It would have to be earned again and again. By the time the opportunity finally arrived, Poland was ready. The long years of disappearance had trained its people in endurance, unity, and sacrifice. They had learned that a nation does not die when its government falls. It dies only when its people stop believing in it. Poland never stopped believing. This era of absence became the foundation of future rebirth. It proved that identity can outlive occupation, that culture can survive without statehood, and that memory can be stronger than power. Poland's disappearance from the map did not erase it from history. Instead, it turned survival itself into a national mission, one that would eventually lead the country back into existence, stronger in spirit than ever before. When Poland regained independence after World War I, it was a moment of joy mixed with uncertainty, because freedom returned to a land that had been absent from maps for more than a century. The new state faced enormous challenges from the very beginning. Its borders were unstable, its economy was fragile, and its people were divided by different experiences under foreign rule. Still, there was hope, and that hope was rooted in memory. Poland knew what it meant to be erased, and it knew what it meant to return. That knowledge shaped everything that followed, especially when the next great catastrophe arrived sooner than anyone expected. In September 1939, Poland became the first battlefield of World War II, attacked simultaneously by Nazi Germany from the west and the Soviet Union from the east. This was not simply an invasion, but an attempt to destroy the Polish nation completely. Cities were bombed, civilians were targeted, and the state was crushed in weeks. Yet defeat on the battlefield did not mean surrender of the spirit. The Polish government escaped into exile, determined to continue the fight. Soldiers regrouped abroad, and within occupied Poland, resistance networks began to form almost immediately. Life under occupation was marked by terror and systematic brutality. The Nazis viewed Poland not as a country to be ruled, but as a population to be enslaved and eliminated. Millions of Polish citizens were murdered, including intellectuals, clergy, and community leaders. The Jewish population of Poland was almost entirely annihilated in the Holocaust, with ghettos and death camps built on Polish soil as part of a machine of industrialized murder. For ordinary people, daily life became a struggle for survival, where even speaking Polish or attending secret classes could mean death. Yet resistance flourished in the shadows. Poland developed one of the largest and most organized underground movements in occupied Europe. Secret schools operated to educate children when official education was banned. Underground newspapers spread information and hope. Intelligence networks gathered crucial data for the Allies, including early reports on the Holocaust. Acts of sabotage disrupted enemy operations, reminding occupiers that Poland was not passive. This resistance was not driven by illusions of easy victory, but by a belief that dignity mattered even in defeat. The Warsaw Uprising of 1944 became the ultimate symbol of this spirit. As German forces weakened and Soviet troops approached the city, the Polish resistance rose up, hoping to liberate the capital before another occupation replaced the first. For 63 days, fighters armed with little more than courage held off one of the most powerful armies in the world. Civilians joined the struggle, turning homes into fortresses. When the uprising failed, the consequences were devastating. Warsaw was systematically destroyed, and hundreds of thousands lost their lives. The world watched, largely unable or unwilling to intervene. When the war finally ended, Poland emerged devastated beyond recognition. Its cities lay in ruins, its population decimated, and its borders shifted westward by decisions made without Polish consent. Although Nazi occupation was over, true freedom remained elusive. Poland fell under Soviet influence, and a communist government was imposed. Once again, the nation found itself controlled by an external power, forced to adjust to a system that limited political freedom and punished dissent. The post-war years were marked by repression, fear, and silence, but also quiet resistance. The memory of wartime suffering made people cautious, yet it did not extinguish the desire for independence. Workers protested, students organized, and intellectuals questioned official narratives. The state demanded loyalty, but loyalty could not erase memory. The knowledge of what Poland had endured during the war became a powerful source of moral authority, reminding people that oppression was not permanent. Over time, resistance took new forms. Instead of armed struggle, it became rooted in solidarity and collective action. The solidarity movement of the 1980s emerged not from elites, but from ordinary workers demanding dignity and rights. What began as labor protests grew into a nationwide challenge to communist rule. The movement drew strength from Poland's long history of resistance, connecting modern struggle to centuries of survival. The collapse of communism did not come through violence, but through persistence. Negotiation replaced force, and compromise replaced revolution. When Poland finally regained full sovereignty in 1989, it marked the end of a long chapter defined by war, occupation, and imposed rule. The transition was difficult, but it was guided by the lessons of history. Poland had learned how fragile freedom could be and how costly its absence was. The experience of World War II and its aftermath left deep scars, but it also forged an unbreakable resilience. Poland emerged with a strong sense of responsibility toward its own independence and toward the suffering of others. The memory of destruction, betrayal, and resistance became central to national identity. It shaped how Poland viewed security, alliances, and the importance of standing firm in the face of aggression. This era of war and oppression tested Poland more severely than any other. It took everything from the nation except its will to endure. Through occupation, genocide, and decades of control, Poland survived not because it was protected, but because it refused to surrender its sense of self. Resistance became a way of life, memory became a weapon, and survival itself became a victory that paved the way for freedom to return once again. When communism finally loosened its grip on Poland, the change did not arrive like a sudden explosion, but like a long, awaited sunrise after decades of darkness. The year 1989 marked a turning point that generations had dreamed of, but few believed they would live to see. Negotiations replaced repression, ballots replaced bullets, and Poland began the difficult transition from an imposed system to self-determined democracy. This was not a clean break with the past, but a careful rebuilding shaped by memory and caution. Poland knew better than most that freedom could be lost as easily as it was gained. The early years of independence were challenging. The economy had to be rebuilt almost from scratch. State industries collapsed, unemployment rose, and inequality became visible in ways people were not used to seeing. For many, freedom came with fear and uncertainty. Yet, despite the hardship, there was a deep sense of ownership over the future. Decisions were no longer made in distant capitals. Poland could finally choose its own path. This sense of responsibility became a powerful driving force, pushing the country through painful reforms that would later define its success. Democracy took root gradually. Political debate returned to public life, media became independent, and civil society flourished. Poles argued, disagreed, protested, and voted, often passionately, sometimes chaotically, but always with the understanding that participation itself was a victory. After decades of silence, having a voice mattered. Mistakes were made, but they were Polish mistakes, not imposed ones, and that distinction meant everything. Poland's return to Europe was both symbolic and practical. Joining NATO and later the European Union was not just about security or economics, but about belonging. These steps represented a final break from the divisions of the Cold War and a return to a community Poland had always seen itself as part of. Membership brought investment, infrastructure, and opportunity, transforming cities and connecting Poland more deeply to global markets. Roads, schools, and businesses reshaped the landscape, while millions of Poles traveled, studied, and worked abroad, carrying their identity with them. Economic growth changed daily life. A new generation grew up without memories of censorship or shortages, experiencing Poland as a place of opportunity rather than limitation. Technology, education, and entrepreneurship flourished. Poland became one of Europe's fastest growing economies, resilient even during global crises. This success was not accidental. It was built on discipline, adaptability, and a long cultural memory of hardship that made people resourceful and persistent. At the same time, history never faded into the background. The scars of war, occupation, and communism remained present in public debates and national consciousness. Museums, memorials, and education kept memory alive, not as a burden, but as a warning. Poland's modern identity was shaped by the belief that sovereignty must be protected and that complacency is dangerous. The past was not something to escape, but something to learn from. Poland's role on the international stage began to grow. It became a strong voice in regional security, especially in matters concerning Eastern Europe. Historical experience gave Poland a unique perspective on aggression, authoritarianism, and the cost of ignoring early warning signs. This made the country increasingly influential in discussions about defense, energy independence, and democratic values. Poland was no longer just reacting to history, but actively shaping it. Internally, debates about identity, values, and direction continued. Freedom allowed disagreement, and disagreement sometimes led to tension. But this, too, was part of democracy. Poland's political life reflected its complexity, shaped by tradition, faith, modernity, and global influence. The country wrestled with how to honor its past while adapting to a rapidly changing world. These conversations were often intense, but they showed a society deeply engaged with its own future. What made modern Poland remarkable was not perfection, but persistence. The nation understood that stability is not guaranteed and progress is never final. Every generation carried the memory of loss and recovery, reminding them that independence is not a gift, but a responsibility. This awareness created a strong sense of civic duty and national pride grounded not in dominance, but in survival. Today, Poland stands as a modern European power with a voice shaped by experience and resilience. Its cities are vibrant, its economy strong, and its society dynamic. Yet beneath this modern surface lies a deep historical awareness that influences how Poland sees the world and itself. The journey from ancient tribes to a race nation, from occupation to freedom, has created a country that knows the value of endurance. Poland's story does not end with arrival or success. It continues as an ongoing process of remembering, choosing, and defending what has been gained. The transformation from communist rule to democratic strength was not just a political change, but a fulfillment of centuries of struggle. It proved that a nation can be broken, divided, and controlled, yet still find its way back to sovereignty. This final chapter is not about victory over others, but victory over disappearance. Poland's modern power is built not on forgetting the past, but on carrying it forward with purpose. From survival to self-determination, from silence to voice, Poland's journey stands as living proof that history does not only shape nations, nations also rise to shape history themselves.